All right, hello there, and welcome to Lesson 4 of the Insight LSAT Mini LSAT Prep course. This is going to be the first of two lessons in which we talk about the often dreaded logic games section. But my hope is that we're going to turn it from a dreaded section into a beloved section. The logic games are actually my favorite part of the LSAT, and I hope throughout these next two lessons I can show you how we can go from making the logic games really scary to actually pretty fun. So let's get to it. The analytical reasoning section is going to give you 35 minutes to deal with four logic games. Each game will have 5 to 7 questions associated with it for a total of about 23 questions. Okay, so what are logic games? They're kind of this weird LSAT specific creation, but what they involve is assigning elements to positions in accordance with rules. And the questions then ask about those assignments that you make. Uh, what I mean by that, it might be a little confusing at first, but it'll all be much clearer in just a moment, so let's hold off on more details. But let me just say again, uh, this section is usually the scariest for students up front, but I can tell you from experience that it is by far the easiest to improve upon, and I think eventually the most fun. Yeah, when I first started preparing for the LSAT and I took a diagnostic test, I got 4 questions right on the logic game section. I think I only got to about 10 of them, and in the end, I only got 4 questions right. By the end of my preparation, I just knew that logic games was going to be a gimme for me. I was almost getting 100% with extra time every single practice test. It was just pretty much free points. Um, what really makes the difference is learning how to deal with this section. It is an LSAT specific thing and you have to understand how it works. If you go in blind to it and just try to, figure it out as you go, this section is going to crush you. But once you understand the method for dealing with this, it is really just like a game. You learn the rules of the game and then you can play. And it's also definitely the most formulaic of the sections. There's a way to do this. And there are some modifications you can make to the methods, but on the whole, there are some rules that you better play by. Take a look at this sample logic game. This is an example of something you might see at the beginning of a logic game section. It'll just have this little blurb here, or this larger blurb. And what this consists of is some information in the beginning, and this is kind of setup information. It's telling you about a scenario. And then there is a list of rules about that scenario. Let's take a closer look. 7 runners, Adam, Barbara, Constanze, Daryl, Edward, Faye, and Gertrude, must occupy starting positions on a running track in accordance with competition guidelines. The positions are adjacent to each other, numbered from left to right, from first to seventh. The competition guidelines are as follows. Okay, so these right here, Adam, Barbara, etc., these are the elements. These running track positions, numbered from left to right for 7, these are the positions you're going to put the elements in. And these are rules that constrain how you can put the elements in the position. So really take note of those major parts of the logic game. There are elements, there are positions, and there are rules. Now, what really changes the way you deal with logic games, what completely makes the difference in your performance, is realizing that this stuff here needs to be dealt with by making diagrams. This is an example of a diagram that is actually going to be of a very familiar type. You're going to learn this sort of thing very well, and I'm going to show you how to get it. But understanding how to use this information to construct a diagram and then knowing how to use that diagram is the whole game, right? This is the game. This is how you play it. You play it on this game board almost right here. And these are representations of the rules. These are the elements. These are the positions. So I'm going to show you how to make these diagrams, but this is really what students don't know how to do at first, and once they learn it, that's how you really start to master the logic games section. Now, while each game may look unique, all games actually fall into a certain category or another. There are really only 2 major game types, and then there are variations within those types, but on the whole, games will fall into one of two categories. The first we just saw an example of. These are called sequencing games. Sequencing games ask you to put elements in positions in an order, right? The runners had to be put in order from first to seventh. Sometimes it's a timeline and sometimes it's a spatial thing like runners on a track, but there's a directional component to it. So rules may say that C needs to be to the left of B, or D has to come after G, and you can represent that along this dimension here, this horizontal dimension here. The other type of game is we're going to call sorting games, and these don't have that same dimension. What these do is they usually have groups or kind of like containers that you have to put the elements in. So here we have recipes. We'll read it in a second, but we have recipes that we're going to represent as R, S, and T, and ingredients that have to go into each one of the recipes. And you need to know which ingredients go into which recipe. So these are sorting games. Let's take a closer look at a sorting game. A chef is working with 7 ingredients: black beans, chicken, dill, eggs, fennel, garlic, and honey. They're your elements, in order to create 3 new top secret recipes codenamed Roger, Sasha, and Talon. There are your categories, and the categories that create the positions. Right? Positions are positions in the groupings or the categories. Every recipe uses at least one ingredient. Every ingredient must be used, and each ingredient can only be used in one recipe. Assignments of the ingredients is subject to the following culinary requirements. And here we have our rules. Chicken cannot be used in the same recipe as eggs, blah, 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 right? So I removed the rules from the sequencing games just to save space on this slide, but these may look pretty similar. There's some information, some setup information. There's some rules. There are elements. There are positions. But you notice by the diagrams, here's an example of what the diagram might look like, that the games and the game board can look a little different depending on what game type you're dealing with. And there are a couple other game boards that come into play when we are dealing with other variations of game types, but we'll get to those shortly. For now, remember sequencing and sorting games. So of course, in addition to the logic game setup, there are going to be questions about the game. And like I said before, there'll be about 5 to 7 questions per game. And in a moment, we're going to talk about the major question types that you'll see on this section. But first, I want to bring up an actually pretty interesting point and pretty important point. And that's that once you deal with the logic game setup, and you read through the information, you see the rules, and you make your diagram, you can actually just put all that setup to the side. All you need going forward is the diagram. It's a very important part of this section. And the reason why you can put everything else aside is because everything is represented here. The elements are here. The positions are here. The rules are represented symbolically here. Everything is put together on this diagram, which we could call a game board, and then you just play the game on the game board. You don't need to go back and read any of those words. It's all represented symbolically. And the game board or diagram is going to allow you to draw inferences, to learn more about this scenario, given what's already given to you, and it's going to allow you to deal with the questions in a much more efficient manner. So let's talk about those questions. The first type of question, you're going to see it on every logic game. It is always the first question in a logic game, and it kind of tests your understanding of the rules. And it's called a possible assignment question. What possible assignment questions do is the answer choices will be 5 different orders. In this case, it's orders, but it could be groupings if it's a sorting game. But it will give you 5 different orders or 5 different assignments of the elements to positions, and you have to choose the answer that conforms to the rules. 4 out of the 5 answer choices will betray one or more of the rules, so they won't be possible assignments given the rules. Only one of them will be an acceptable assignment list. So let's take a look at the example. Which of the following could be an accurate list of runners listed in order from first starting position through the 7th? And in this portion of the lesson, I'm going to be giving you just examples of what answer choices look like, and I will tell you whether or not these particular answer choices are correct or incorrect. And what I recommend you do, not right now, I don't think it's a good idea right now when you're just trying to learn about this this section, but should you go back and take a second look at this lesson, if you do a second pass through of this lesson, challenge yourself to see why it is that these answers are right or wrong. For now, I'm just going to tell you whether they're right or wrong, just kind of for fun. But when you go back through it, see if you can figure out this for yourself. So here's an example of an answer choice for a possible assignment question. You can see it puts the elements in a certain order. Seven positions, 7 elements. It's in a certain order here, and we want to know whether or not this is possible given the rules. In this case, it is an incorrect answer. It betrays one of the rules, but I will leave that to you later to figure out. Now these next two I want to deal with together because they're very closely related. A question may ask you about a certain scenario, and they'll ask if that scenario must be false or true, or could be false or true, and the other ones will not have that feature. So let's take a look at the example. Which one of the following must be true? Gertrude starts in a lower numbered position than Edward. See, this is like a partial version of the possible assignments. It tells you about a couple assignments, or something about the assignments. It describes a little bit of a scenario, and it wants to know whether or not this must be true. In this case, it does. It does have to be true. But again, you can find that out for yourself later. Wrong answer choices for must be true questions will have what feature? If the right answer must be true, what are the possibilities for the truth values of wrong choices? Well, if the right answer must be true, then each of the wrong answers could be false or must be false. And that kind of takes us to our next one. What if the question asks you, which one of the following could be false? And now I have the same answer choice. It's the same scenario presented as an answer choice for this sort of question. In this case, this is incorrect. Now this should be fairly obvious actually, because we know if this is a scenario that must be true. If it's a scenario that must be true, then it's not the case that it could be false. It must be true. So you need to kind of get comfortable with these combinations here. Must be false or true, could be false or true. And you should understand, without having to think too much about it, what the right answer choice is going to be and what the possibilities for the wrong answer choices could be. Moving right along, a couple of other question types. How many ways questions. Remember, the rules constrain the possibilities for assignments. If there were no rules, we'd just have this crazy amount of ways that you could put these in here. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, C, B, D, E, F, G. And you would just keep going all down. There'd be so many of them. So many permutations, we would say. But the rules constrain us. And how many ways questions ask us about how many ways a certain thing can happen given these constraints. Often, and in this case, they'll add another rule actually just for the purposes of this one question, and then say if this thing happens, then how many ways are there? So they'll constrain you even further. But let's take a look at this one. If Constanza starts in the 5th position, how many different starting position assignments are possible? Okay, right? So like I said, it just puts one of the elements into a position which, when combined, especially when combined with the other rules, seriously constrains things from that crazy amount of permutations we had before. So it constrains us even further, and then it says, well, how many different ways could it happen now? And the answer choices will usually be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. It won't be crazy high numbers. In this case, believe it or not, once this extra condition is put in, there are only 2 ways that we can put the assignments. So try that on your own. Next question type, rule modification. This can take various forms, but basically the question suggests a change to the rules and asks you what the result of that is. So it might ask you what happens if you add this rule, how many ways could things happen? It might ask you which of the following rules could be substituted for a certain rule that's already there and have the same effect. There's a couple different ways it can happen. In this case, we are asked Which of the following rules, if added, would completely determine the possible assignments of runners to starting positions? So all the answer choices are new rules, and one of those answer choices, if added to the existing rules, actually makes it so there's only one possible assignment of runners to starting position. Pretty crazy, right? Just one more rule constrains all these crazy possibilities to just one possibility. And in this case, you'll have a little fun later with this. It is actually this rule. If you add this rule to the existing rules, there is only one way to put these elements in these positions. And yeah, believe it or not, try it out for yourself. It's pretty crazy. And now these aren't actually question types, but they're question type modifiers, so they can be kind of applied to any of the question types we've talked about so far. Um, the first one is a conditional modifier. We saw this last slide. This is when a condition is added only for the purposes of that one question. It's very important that you don't leave that condition in place for other questions. It's just in force for the one question, and it takes the form of a conditional. Look here. If Constanza starts in the fifth position, that is the condition, right? Here's a new condition just for this question. If Constanza starts in the fifth position, and then a regular question, which one of the following could be false? In this case, this answer is wrong. What does that mean? What does it mean that this, if the right answer could be false, what does that mean this is? It's a must be true. So in the condition in which Constanza starts in the fifth position, every single time Constanza is in the fifth position, Adam actually does have to start in the first position. And you can try to see that on your own after you have a better sense of how to do logic games. And the second modifier is the except modifier. Fairly self-explanatory, but just, be aware of it. It's always in capital letters, just to draw attention to it. But it asks a regular question and just kind of changes things around by saying except. So each one of the following could be true except, right? And this is where your understanding of the relationships between those must be trues, must be false, could be true, could be false really comes into play. Very quickly, you should understand that each of the following could be true except, what are you looking for here? If all of the wrong answers in this case are going to be could be trues, what is your right answer going to be? Must be false, right? Must be false is the except version of could be true. And in this case, this answer is correct. This must be false. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, these question types are well and good, but I don't know how to make these diagrams. I don't know how to use these diagrams. I don't know how to answer these questions. I don't know how to do this section. I don't know what I'm going to do. Fear not. I am going to demonstrate for you right now how I created that diagram for this sample logic game, and then we're going to do a little bit of practice, and I'm going to show you how we can use the diagram to answer questions. So this is the real heart of the sequencing part of the lesson. We're going to deal with this type of game and how we make the diagram. So let's go ahead and read it out loud one more time, and then I will slowly walk you through the process of creating this diagram. 7 runners, Adam, Barbara, Constanze, Daryl, Edward, Faye, and Gertrude, must occupy starting positions on a running track in accordance with competition guidelines. The positions are adjacent to each other, numbered from left to right, from first to seventh. The competition guidelines are as follows. Adam must occupy either the first or seventh position. Daryl and Faye must start next to one another. Constanze must occupy some position before Edwards, but cannot occupy the first position. Gertrude must occupy one of the first 3 positions. And Barbara must occupy the position immediately before Edwards. Alright, so the first thing I do when I'm creating a diagram is I look to the setup right here, this introductory paragraph, I guess you could say. And I look for the type of diagram that I'm supposed to construct. And when I look at the setup, it reveals to me the shape of the diagram. It tells me what sort of picture I should draw. How does it do that? Well, in this case, it tells me that there are positions adjacent to each other, numbered from left to right, from first to seventh. So the heart of my diagram comes from this setup right here, and it's informed by mostly that sentence right there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make 7 positions adjacent to each other, numbered from left to right, from first to seventh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're my 7 positions from left to right. I'm going to number them. 1, 2. Excuse the poor computer handwriting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's going to be the heart of my diagram. These are the positions that I can put my elements in. Now the second thing I do before even getting to the rules is I have the shape of my diagram. I also want to have what you could call the roster of elements. This is where I'm just going to put all of my elements, all of my pieces of this puzzle just on my diagram so I know what I'm dealing with. And I'm also going to get rid of their names and make it into just simpler letters. You will always notice that there will be no double lettering in the logic games. There's not going to be Adam and then Alex, for instance, because those would be 2 A's. They know you're going to reduce these to letters, and that's why they're always going to have unique first letters. So it's just kind of up in the corner here, out of way, because I'm going to kind of leave this alone. This is just for my reference. I'm going to put A for Adam, B for Barbara, C, D, E, F, and G. There's my roster of elements. Here are my positions. These elements need to get into these positions in some order. But like I said before, as it stands, there are just, oh man, probably thousands of ways that could happen. Definitely hundreds. So I need to make it more manageable, and that's where the rules come in. The rules are really going to constrain our options. Okay, let's take the rules one at a time and try to represent them on the diagram. First one, Adam must occupy either the first or seventh position. Okay, so the way I do that when it's in a disjunction like that, an either or, is I represent it with these little slashes here. So A is either going to be there, the first position, or going to be on the last position. And kind of look what that is there. One of these two things is going to happen, and the same thing on this other side is going to happen. If A is here on the left, then the left over here is going to be blank. I don't know what it is. If the right side of the slash happens in the first position, if it's blank, then I know going to the right side of it over here that A is over here. So this demonstrates that A is either here or here. And this rule is taken care of. Daryl and Faye must start next to one another. I usually reserve the bottom space under my diagram for rules that can't be written directly on the positions. Some rules can be written, like this one, can be written directly on the positions. Like for instance, if it just said Gertrude starts in the 5th position, I just would have put G right here, right on the diagram. But for other rules, I put them below. Usually. It depends on the type of rule, but ones that don't fit so well, I put below. Daryl and Faye must start next to one another. So for that, I'm going to represent that kind of as a block. I put Daryl, I put Faye, and I put a block around them, linking them together so that they can't be pulled apart. Now this creates a chunk here that I know has to fit somewhere in here. It shows that nothing can be in between these two, so I need to move this whole unit. Now instead of just putting D somewhere and F somewhere else, I know that D and F have to move together as a unit, and that already constrains possibilities a lot. However, it says must start next to one another. It doesn't say D has to be before F. So I think an easy way to represent that is just to put a little arrow underneath to show that these guys can be switched. It's either DF or FD, but whatever it is, they need to be a chunk like this, and they need to move together. You could put a DF or FD, but we're looking for simplicity and efficiency here. As long as I understand that this means these can be swapped, then I feel like having this one picture here for this one rule is a more efficient and effective way of dealing with things. Okay, that rule is taken care of. Constanza must occupy some position before Edwards, but cannot occupy the first position. Okay, when I know that an element can't be occupying a position, it's sort of similar to saying that that element is in that position. I would put, if it said Constanza is in the first position, I just would have put a C here. But since Constanza can't occupy the position, I still want to keep that notation near the first position. I really want to make the diagram as cohesive as possible. So I'm going to put a no, remember the negation sign, no C under 1. Demonstrates to me that C can't be here. Whatever is here, it can't be C. But there's more to this rule. Constanza must occupy some position before Edwards. Okay, so I'll put that in my little rule section down here. And now I'm going to introduce a directional symbol that I'm going to use a lot and have you use. It's like that. C before E. Now that differs from what I drew with D and F. D and F have to be right next to each other. They're a chunk. That's why it's this whole square. It's this block that has to go on this diagram. What C-E means is that C just has to be before it somewhere. It could be C second and E sixth, C second and C5, or they could be next to each other. It could be C3 and C5. You know, it doesn't really matter where exactly these goes, so long as they are in this order, right? So this dash indicates the order. And that'll do it for this rule. Gertrude must occupy one of the first 3 positions. All right, so for this one, I'm going to look for another way to represent it symbolically on the diagram. If you absolutely cannot figure out a way of putting a rule onto the diagram in an efficient symbolic way, you can be a little wordier, so to speak, with things. So for instance, you might put G1 or G2 and put or G3, whatever. But that's usually not the way you want to do it. See how these, I guess I'll just put it out there all the way so you can see it. Or G3. Look, this represents that rule, right? G is in 1, or G is in 2, or G is in 3. That moves the rule from here onto my diagram, and it's briefer, it's more reduced than this sentence, and it's more symbolic. But this sort of thing you want to try to avoid. You want to see if there's a better way to make it show up visually on the diagram. And the way I'm going to do that here, so I'm going to get rid of this. I don't like it. I want to be able to visualize so I can make inferences. I want to be able to visualize so I can answer questions more quickly. I want this to become a game with pictures, not a game with words. I draw the G there, that little circle, and I demonstrate it has to be somewhere in here. Okay? 1, 2, or 3. But see how it's visually represented? It's already in the general area of where it's going to go, as opposed to being just represented with, with symbols over here. So that's how I'm going to show Gertrude must occupy one of the first 3 positions. And finally, Barbara must occupy the position immediately before Edwards. So that's very similar to D and F, but there's going to be no arrow because it says immediately before. So we know that it's B and E together as a chunk. A little bit of a sloppy chunk, but there you go. This chunk also has to be in there somewhere. So now we have 2 chunks. Chunks really constrain things. And now that we have 2 chunks, it's almost like having fewer elements because we're moving this whole piece somewhere, this whole piece somewhere, and the other pieces have to fit around it. So here's representing Barbara must occupy the position immediately before Edwards. And there's that rule. Now I want to pause for a second. This is most of the diagram here. It's most of what we had before. But do you see a way to combine any of the pictures that we have here? It's always better if you can, without losing meaning, to consolidate your diagram. Make it tighter and tighter so that more can be seen with less time reading it and looking at it. So take a look here. Are there any pictures here that can be combined that help us to learn a little bit more and actually constrain things a little bit more? Well, are there any elements that feature in more than one rule? There's the C's here and there's the E's here. Take a look at this chunk here. We know more about E than this rule here suggests. I can actually put this whole chunk right here and get rid of it over here. I never would have actually written this in the first place. I would have just added it right off the bat. But now let's get rid of that, and let's get rid of this too, and have one new rule. C has to come before the chunk of B and E. So now we know something that we didn't know before. We know that Constanza has to come before Barbara as well, because they're a chunk. C could not be before E without also being before B, right? Because then it would have to break the chunk. It would have to be right in between them, and that can't happen. So we know that C comes before the chunk of B and E. And we can scrap the other bits because they have been combined into one larger rule. So again, Adam must occupy either the first or seventh position. First or seventh position, represented by the slashes. Daryl and Faye must start next to one another. Daryl and Faye must start next to one another, one way or another. Constanza must occupy some position before Edwards, but cannot occupy the first position. That's a two-part rule. We have no first position for Constanza. And then we also have Constanza being before Edwards, but we combined that Barbara is immediately before Edwards, so now we have Constanza must occupy some position before the chunk of Barbara and Edward. And Gertrude must occupy one of the first three positions, demonstrated by Gertrude hovering over the three possible positions that she can occupy here. So that is how we create this diagram. It is a lot more condensed than all these words. It's visual. It allows us to have a game board that we can play on and we can deal with as we go through the questions. And if that was too fast for you, if it didn't make a lot of sense what I did, rewind the video a bit and take another look at how it happened, because you're definitely going to want to see how I translated all of this into this tighter, more consolidated picture. And as I said before, we can forget about those runners and the whole setup, the whole subject matter of the game. It doesn't matter anymore. All those details don't matter anymore. Everything is contained here on our diagram, and we know we're dealing with a sequencing game. We know that the elements are A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. We don't care what their names actually are. And we know that there are 7 positions, and we have to put these elements into those positions. We also know every single one of those rules, all those words, all that information. We know it all just by looking at this diagram and understanding how we use the symbols. I understand that A either has to be here or here and nowhere else. A is either in 1 or 7. I know that C can't be in 1. I know that G is in 1 through 3. I know that C has to be before a chunk of B and E, and I know that D and F have to form a chunk, and that it can be either DF or FD. The diagram is super, super powerful. I cannot stress it enough. It is the absolute heart of this section. It is how you're going to progress. It is how you're going to understand how these games work. It's how you're going to make inferences. It is how you are going to succeed at this section. So study it, practice it. We're going to have some time to practice right now, but I can't say it enough. Diagrams, 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 game boards. This is what it's all about. Alright, at long last, it is now your turn. You are now about to get started on the glorious path to creating these powerful diagrams yourself. But I'm not going to throw you right into that task right away. First, I want to start slow and have you practice representing rules symbolically. Kind of like what I just showed you how to do in creating the diagram, but just for individual rules. These rules are not related. They're not going to come together in one larger diagram. They're just practice problems. So what you're going to do here is you're going to take the names that are in the rules and you're going to reduce them to the variables, right? Just reduce them to the first letter of each name, and then you want to use the appropriate symbol to represent this rule in a much more condensed way. So I'll do the first one for you just to demonstrate what we're doing here, and then we'll have you pause the video and do the rest yourself. There are a couple more slides of this, so there'll be plenty of opportunities. Karen must dance at some point before Jamal. Now, even though this rule discusses time, right, dancing at some point before Jamal is like a temporal thing instead of a spatial thing, it's still a sequencing rule. Before we had left to right, and that just meant left to right. When we wrote a rule with something to the left of something else, that just meant it was to the left of something else. We can still represent time that way, where something to the left is just something before in time, like a regular timeline. So it doesn't matter if it's runners on a track or people entering a room in order, people marching. What's important about sequencing games is there's an order to things, either time or space order, and you're putting the elements in those orders. So it makes no difference. In fact, Karen must dance at some point before Jamal is the exact same rule as Constanze must occupy a starting position before Edward. And so because of that, the rule is going to look the same. We're just going to use different letters. So Karen must dance before Jamal is K for Karen, is before Jamal, J. And that's how you represent that one. That's it. All right, go ahead and pause your video. Try this on your own. Again, don't just do this in your head. You're robbing yourself of an opportunity to really practice this skill if you do that. Find a piece of paper, pen or pencil, and write these out, and then compare them to what I give you in just a moment. So pause your video, do the rest of these, and I'll be back just a second with the answers. All right. Lou's shift must come after Smith's. Well, that's the same thing as Smith's must come before Lou's. So I'll do S for Smith before L for Lou. Pretty much the same thing. No problem, right? Devin enters the room before Gary, but after Michelle. Okay, we're building now, getting a little more complicated. 3 elements in one rule, but the same basic idea. Devin is before Gary, but after Michelle. Okay, let's just take it as it comes. Devin, D, is before Gary. Cool. But after Michelle. No problem. And look, we learned something. It seems kind of obvious, but we can see it so clearly. Michelle is also before Gary. Pikachu must be to the left of both Ernie and Bert. Okay, I wonder if you got this one. We didn't discuss this yet, but let's see what you did and compare it to this. When we have to the left of both Ernie and Bert, but we don't know the relationship between Ernie and Bert, we need to use another line. So we have Pikachu, right, before Ernie. But again, remember, I want to keep things as consolidated as possible. I don't want to put another P over here, P before B. I want to keep it on the same thing, so I just branch it off. See? This demonstrates that P comes before E and P comes before B, but we don't know about these guys. It could be P before E and then B comes somewhere later, or it's P before B and then E comes somewhere later. We just don't know the relation between E and B, but we know P, so we represent it this way. Nancy must march right after Zara, but at some point before Todd. Okay, I hope you saw that there was a chunk here. Nancy must march right after Zara. So we know we have a ZN chunk. Box it up. Show that it's a chunk. And that whole chunk must come at some point before Todd. So we can combine different kinds of rules, right? We can have a chunk and this directional component in one. No problem at all. Now we know that the chunk of Zara and Nancy comes before Todd. And we can see so clearly that even though it says that Nancy is at some point before Todd, we know that Zara is also there because they're together. So the power of representing rules symbolically really can't be expressed enough. It really is very great. All right, how'd you do? Feel free to rewind the video a little bit and try it again. or just take a look closely and come back at another time and give yourself a little time to forget. But I hope you did pretty well. Either way, we'll move on to a little more practice right now. Alright, more practice. In this one, we're going to be dealing with some stuff you haven't seen before, but I'm just going to throw you right into it. I want to see what you come up with, and then I'll show you the methods that I use. Who knows what your creativity may breed, maybe something great. So go ahead and pause the video, and same thing, represent these rules symbolically, condense them, and I'll be back in just a moment to show you how I represent them. Okay, Gail and Dolly both must swim before Jared. This is similar to one that we did in the last slide. So we have Jared over here, and both of these people are before him. So I branch them off and put Gail and Dolly. Remember, I don't know the relationship between these two, but I know each of their relationships to Jared. There must be exactly one person between Kyle and Tom. Here's where things get new. Exactly one person. But the way to represent this is not so different from the chunk that we had before. It's just going to be a different kind of chunk. So I'll put Kyle. I'll put Tom. And I'm going to also chunk them up. It's a different kind of chunk because I know that there's someone here. Just don't know who it is. So this shows Kyle, some mystery element, and then Tom in a chunk. And remember, just like in some of the stuff we saw before, we don't know if it's Kyle before Tom or Tom before Kyle. We know someone's in between them, and we know the whole thing is a chunk, but we don't know the order, so we have to draw ourselves a little arrow here, a little double-sided arrow to demonstrate these can be swapped if they have to be. So this is just a bigger chunk, and something can go in the middle. It will have to, but we know that this is a chunk. There must be at least one person between Wendy and Amy. Okay, similar to this, but now we have an open-ended thing. At least one. It could be one, it could be two, it could be three, it could be all the way up. We don't know how many numbers we're involved with here, so it's an open-ended bit. How do we represent that symbolically? Well, let's start with what we had before. Wendy and Amy. And we'll chunk them. What this rule is really saying is that Wendy and Amy can't be next to each other. So, well, let's try this two ways. Let's try it one way where we go Wendy, Amy, and we put 1 plus here. Shows that there is something in between. It's at least one, and it could be more. Here there was no number. It's just this one element. It's all clearly demonstrated. But here, we don't know. It could be 1, 2, 3, or 4, but it has to be 1 plus. So we put Wendy, Amy, and 1 plus. We put the arrow because we don't know who's first and who's second. We do that. Now, you could also, you have the option, maybe you did this, you could notice that what it means to say there must be at least one person between Wendy and Amy is that they can't be next to each other. So another way of representing this rule, and perhaps a better way, I'm not sure, is to show a chunk, a Wendy-Amy chunk where they are next to each other. And what would that look like? Again, we wouldn't know what it was, so we would put the little arrows, and we would say, no, this can't happen. No Wendy-Amy chunks like that, or like the other way. So, take your pick. Cassandra must be 2 spaces in front of Quentin. Okay. If you didn't get this way of doing things before, and you want to pause your video again to try this one, and maybe this one again, that's an okay thing to do. So I'll give you a second to do that if you want, and then I will show you how to do it. Okay, Cassandra must be 2 spaces in front of Quentin. Cassandra, Quentin. There's no open end at this point. It's all very clear to us. It's exactly 2 spaces. Cassandra's first, so no arrows. No need to put 2 plus or anything like that. We just draw it right in there. This chunk is going somewhere. C space space Q is going somewhere. We don't know what's going to go here, but we know this will be a chunk itself. At least 3 people must run after Lendl, but before Felicia. Okay, this is similar to these guys here. So we know Lendl is before Felicia. Oh, you know what? Shouldn't have put that there. Lendl's before Felicia. There'll be a chunk. And it's open-ended, kind of like this one. So I'm just going to put 3 plus to show that Lendl's here, at least 3 people are here, and then Felicia will be after. And this will be a chunk itself. All right, hope you did well with this one. All right, now we're building. You did a little practice representing rules in isolation. Now I want you to represent rules together on a diagram that is given for you already. So this is a very, very simple, simplified logic game. It's a sequencing game with 5 positions, and I want you to try to represent the rules on this diagram all together. Kind of like what I did when I created that larger diagram. We're combining that with the practice you just did, and we are moving you slowly in the direction of understanding how to create these diagrams. So pause the video and give this a try. Good luck. Okay, let's do it. Let me throw up the roster here. I didn't do that before, so throw R, S, T, V and U, V and W, just 5 elements, 5 positions. Very, very simple sequencing. And let's get to our rules. Rogers must stand in the center. Okay, the center is 3, so we're just going to throw an R right in there, and that takes care of 1 position and 1 element completely. Great. Vera must stand at least 2 spaces to the left of Wu. Put that in our little rule section down here. Vera, Wu, a chunk, and it's at least 2 spaces, so 2 plus. Thomas must stand at one end of the row or else the other. Remember these disjunctions we can represent with the slash. Here's Thomas here at one end of the row or else the other end of the row. And Smith cannot stand next to Thomas. Okay. I'm just going to put Smith, Thomas chunk. In either direction, because all it says is next to, and a big old slash through it. That can't happen. Remember, for any way of representing a rule, it's very easy to throw a slash through it or use a negation sign to show its negation. Okay, congratulations to you if you succeeded on this part. We are building and building. You're going to be there soon. All right, let's do another one. Let's keep building this skill set. Pause your video and I'll be back in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and throw the roster up here. A, B, C, D, and E. And let's get to the rules. Armand cannot present last. Okay, no problem. Remember how to do this. No Armand in 5. Daria must be one of the first 3 to present. This is similar to a rule we did before. Okay, let's do it the same way. We want to be consistent about the way we diagram so that it's always clear to us what each thing we write means. Betsy must be one of the last three to present. All right, we better stagger it a little bit here. Betsy. Little overlap on 3. Okay, Betsy is one of the last 3. At least one student presents between Daria and Betsy. Okay, we're going to make a chunk. Daria, Betsy, chunk it. At least one, put a 1 plus. Now, it doesn't say in this rule whether Daria is before Betsy or Betsy's before Daria, so usually I would put that arrow. But do I need to do that here? Why not? We already know about these 2 rules up here, right? Daria's one of the first 3, Betsy's one of the last 3. So actually, we also can very immediately infer that Daria is going to be before Betsy. There's no way Betsy can get in front of Daria because she's got to be in one of the last 3. Daria's be one of the first 3. There's no way she can get in front of him. So I'm actually going to leave this the way it is. We've learned something new from this rule and combining it with the other rules. And that's really, again, that's the beauty of using the diagrams. The rules begin to combine. When you see things visually, you start to see how there's connections between the rules. So I'm not going to put any arrow here because I know that D is going to be at least one student before Betsy. Moving along. Eduardo presents either second or fourth. Okay, simple disjunction. Either here or else here. Very good. And either Chelsea presents first or Betsy presents last, but not both. Okay, either or, but not both. How are we going to do this? All right, we can make something happen here. This is me a version of a disjunction. Let's put it like this. Let's try this out. Let's represent 2 scenarios. One on the left of the slash and one on the right of the slash. So either Chelsea or no Chelsea. And what are the corresponding scenarios? Well, since it's not both, we know that if Chelsea is here, Betsy cannot be here. So the corresponding scenario of Chelsea's in first is that there is no Betsy fifth. And the corresponding scenario to no Chelsea being here is that Betsy is fifth, because one of them has to happen, but they can't both happen. So let's try it that way. Cool. All right. This was more complicated. I hope you did well. I hope you're happy with your performance on this one. Now for a moment, I want to go back to the original diagram that we were dealing with in this lesson, the one about the runners, because I want to show you really why we're doing this. I want to show you the power of putting all of the information from the setup into one place, into this picture. And the reason that we do that is because we're going to try to see how the rules interact with each other when they're all put together, how they combine to allow us to learn more than we initially see. So for this demonstration, I've introduced a new rule. Constanza must start in the 5th position, and this rule is going to interact with the other rules in order to show us much more than we initially see here. So watch how this happens. It's pretty crazy. Constanza must start in the 5th position. Okay, that means that C goes in 5. Now if C goes in 5, we already have C in a different rule. We know that C has to be before a chunk, a 2-item chunk of B and E. Now since C is in 5, there are only 2 slots after it, which means that's where that chunk has to go. There's no other room for it. So now, in addition to knowing where C is, we know where B is. I'm going to write right over this other one, because we know where E is also. Okay, but now that we know this, what about this other rule with A? This rule says that A is either in 7th or 1st, but now 7th is taken up by E. So that leaves only one spot for A. A's got to be in 1. So now in addition to knowing C, B, and E, we know where A is. Already pretty good. Can we do any more? Take a look. Can we do any more? What about G? Well, A took up one of the 3 available slots for G. Can we narrow it down any more? Or are there are 2 more that G can go in, either 2 or 3? But is that true? What happens if we put G in 3? And what's left, by the way? There's G, D, and F. These 3 slots have to fit G, D, and F in some order, where D and F are a chunk. So what happens if we put G in 3? If we put G in 3, we can't put this chunk anywhere else, because we'd have G at 3 and the remaining slots would be 2 and 4. But we need 2 slots together for the chunk of D and F. So G actually can't go in 3. There's only one place left for G, and that is 2. So now we know where G goes. And now we have 3 and 4, the only 2 positions remaining, and D and F, the only 2 elements remaining. And so we've narrowed down this entire crazy amount of permutations here to actually just 2 possibilities. What's left is either, because D and F could be either way here. Remember, this chunk could be DF or FD. We've narrowed it all down to 2 possibilities. It's either D in 3 and F in 4, or the other way around, F in 3 and D in 4. And that is, look how much more information we have here. The definite position of C, the definite of B, the definite of E, the definite of A, the definite of G, and narrowed down to 2 slots for each of the remaining 2. There are only 2 possibilities left for assignments in this game once we add this rule. And that is a direct result of combining rules and making these inferences. That is the power of the diagram. And this is playing on the game board. That's the power of playing on the game board, working with your diagram. This kind of stuff is going to happen all the time in pretty much every game that you deal with. So the sooner you learn to play it, the better. And now let's do another demonstration, just kind of for fun and to show you another way things can play out. This one's actually more powerful than the last one. So we'll get rid of the rule from last slide. It's no longer the case that Constanza has to be in the 5th position. And instead we'll have this rule. Gertrude starts in the position immediately after phase. So how would you represent this symbolically? Can you put it in this diagram somewhere? Can you combine it with anything we already have? Well, phase here. So we can add it onto this chunk. Now before, we didn't know whether it was D or F or D. But since now we know that something has to be immediately after F, this is already determined. We don't need this arrow anymore. It needs to be DFG because it can't be FD, because then 2 things would be immediately after F. The only way we can have D and F together and G coming immediately after F is to go DFG in a big chunk like this. Okay, now let's talk about the positions. We know something else about G. G has to be in one of the first 3 positions. But now we know G is in a chunk, and the chunk has 2 positions before it, which means that G can't go in 2 and G can't go in 1, because there'd be no room for these chunks to the left. So now we know that this chunk goes right here, 1, 2, 3, D, F, and G. Okay, those positions are a sure thing. Okay, again, this rule about A. Since A has to be in 1 or 7, and D is already in 1, A's got to be in the only other possibility, 7. And that leaves us with C, B, and E left, and 4, 5, and 6 left. And we already know the order these have to be in. So C has to come before the chunk of B and E. The only way that can happen is this. And that's it. All the elements are fit into all the positions, and the game is complete. There is only one way, if we add this rule, that the elements can be assigned to the positions. It's completely determined. And that realization came about just from combining all of the rules and understanding how they can work together. This is really the power of making inferences on the logic games diagram. So what do you do once you finish diagram? Let's talk about process for a second. You turn the page in the test booklet, and there is the analytical reasoning section. You start it up, you read through the setup of the first logic game, and you know what game type it is, so you start making your diagram. You represent all of the rules symbolically on the diagram, and you feel like your diagram's good. You've made any little inferences and combination of rules that you can make up front, and then you feel like your diagram is complete. What do? Well, my strong advice actually is to do pretty much nothing. Take a breather. Really, seriously. Right after you diagram any game, you should take a moment to collect yourself. You should double check your translation of rules into symbols. It only takes a few seconds, and it is well worth it, I promise you. You should also make sure that you understand what you've just diagrammed. Make it a habit. Often, certain rules do a lot of work, or certain elements are particularly limiting. When you take this breather, you may spot these things, where you might not have spotted them as you were going through it. Inferences you didn't see at first might also just pop into your mind at this point. You'll be surprised. Plus, you collect yourself and you transition from diagram making mode into question answering mode, and that's got some value too. So take a breath, enjoy the breath, and get yourself in the right mindset for moving on to the questions. Now, the second thing you do is actually you have an opportunity to double check your understanding of the game and of the diagram, because the first question is always going to be pretty easy, and it's always going to be one of those possible assignment question type questions. So you'll always see this one first, and what it is actually doing is testing your understanding of the game and of the rules. And although it's actually the only question type and the only question that you won't need your diagram for, because you're actually going to use the rules directly, even though that's the case, if you have a problem with this question, if two answers look correct to you, that's going to indicate that there's a problem with your understanding of the game, or you haven't understood the rules correctly, because only one of these can be correct. And if there's a problem with your understanding of the game or a problem with your understanding of the rules, that will indicate that your diagram might not be correct. So even though you don't use the diagram for these questions, they actually can serve as a way to double check your understanding of the game and to double check your diagram. So let's go ahead and try to answer this question, and I'll show you the very particular way of dealing with possible assignment questions. And it's the method that you should use every time, and it's a pretty foolproof method. These are very easy questions. You should get them right every time. So what you do here is first you understand that 4 of the 5 choices for this question type are going to betray at least one of these rules. And only one of them will be a possible assignment. So what we're going to have you do is actually start with the rules. This is a very particular way of doing things that is different than any other question type. You start with the rules, and one at a time you read the rules, and you then check your answer choices to see if that one rule is broken by the answer choice. If it is, you cross it out. If it's not, you leave it alone, and then you move to the next rule. Watch how that works. First rule, Adam must occupy either the first or 7th position. All I'm going to do on this pass through is look at each answer choice and make sure Adam is either in the first or the last position. A, Adam's in the first, fine. B, Adam's in the first, fine. C, Adam's in the middle. That's not the first or the 7th. C is definitely the wrong answer. D, Adam's at the last position, good. E, Adam's at the last position, good. This rule is finished. Next rule, Daryl and Faye must start next to one another. All I'm going to do this pass through is look for Daryl Faye or Faye Daryl. Adam Daryl, nope, look right here. It's wrong. Daryl's here, Faye's here, they're not next to each other. B, Faye Daryl, good. D, Daryl Faye, good. E, Faye Daryl, good. Constanza must occupy some position before Edwards, but cannot occupy the first position. I can look at those two together. So it's got to be C before E, but C can't be 1. B, C before E, good. C's not 1, good. D, C before E, good, and C's not 1, good. E, C before E, good, but C is 1, and that was not allowed. E is the wrong answer. Gertrude must occupy one of the first 3 positions. That's all I'm going to look for here. Adam, Gertrude, there you go, she's in the second position. Gertrude, she's in the first position. Okay, so this one didn't do anything for us. It must be the last one that finishes it. Barbara must occupy the position immediately before Edward. So I'm looking for B-E. Look at answer choice B. Looking for Barbara before Edward. Edward before Barbara. This is wrong also. This is your answer. And that's how we do possible assignment questions. As long as we understand the rules correctly, we'll have no problem answering this, and that will indicate that our diagram was made based on a correct understanding of the rules and of the game. So it's another chance to look at the rules, and it's another chance to double check your understanding of the game. Alright, let's put it all together. We have worked together to create a diagram. We've diagrammed rules. We know question types. Now let's use the diagram we have to answer some questions. This is, after all, what you're going to be doing in this section. So go ahead and pause your video, use the diagram provided, and try to answer this question. And then I will be back in just a moment to work with you through it. Okay, which of the following cannot be true? Okay, so I'm just going to start going through these and rather quickly, and I'm going to imagine putting one of these in place. I'm going to imagine one of these being the case. I'm going to kind of see it on the diagram, and I'm just going to very quickly see what immediate implications occur, what immediately follows from that, and I'm going to see if anything starts to go wrong. Before I start investing a lot of time plotting everything out with each of these options, I just want to see up front, does anything pop out to me as immediately causing a problem? So I'll start with A. Daryl starts in the 5th position. Okay, Daryl's part of a chunk. Daryl's in the 5th, D in 5. That means F is going to end up being in 6 or 4. Nothing immediately wrong with that. I'm going to move on. Faye starts in the 6th position. F here, she's in a chunk. That means either D is 5 or 7. If D's in 7, then A would be in 1. So far that looks fine. Barbara starts in the 2nd position. B here, B's part of a chunk, so E would be in 3, and B also needs to be behind C, so that would mean B here, E here, and C here, which means there'd be no room for G, and that is a problem. So I know already C is my answer. Now, I approach the questions a little bit differently in the analytical reasoning section than I do in the other ones. I'm not actually going to go on and look at D and E. I'm confident enough in my diagram, and I'm confident enough in what I just did there to see that when I put B here, that takes up 2, it takes up 3, and it takes up 1, and there's no G. That can't be true. I'm ready to move on. I want to be using my time efficiently in the logic game section, so I do treat it a little bit differently than the other sections. I'm not working wrong to right, looking for better answers. Once I find the right answer, if I see the right answer immediately, or if I see it very quickly, I pick it and I move on. Now, if you become great at these, and you have extra time, and that is possible, I promise you that is possible, you can get through these sections sometimes and have some extra time once you're really well practiced, then perhaps you want to go back and look at ones that you weren't so sure of and knock out wrong answers so you really have a confidence about the right answer. But for now, what your preparation time is really supposed to be aimed at is being really good at making these diagrams and using these diagrams. That's where the time investment is made, and it's supposed to pay off in the questions. So this time it paid off. It was the visual representation of the rules that allowed me to make this conclusion, and I know that this is the right answer, and I'm just going to move on. Alright, let's do another one. This is going to be a conditional question, and I should say a word up front about how to deal with conditional questions on the analytical reasoning section. It's a good idea to draw in the condition that you're dealing with for this question right onto your diagram. That way you see the new condition in combination with all the other rules, you see how they interact, and you can make new inferences. However, you don't want to write a condition like this one onto your master diagram, the one you're using for all the other questions. Why? Because the condition is only for this one question. And if you represent it on your master diagram, the one you're using for all the other questions, you run the risk of not realizing later, as you're moving quickly through these logic games, that one part of your diagram is actually reserved only for one question. You might think it's just part of the regular setup, and you might use that on a different question and you'll get the wrong answer. So what I recommend you do is you actually create a new diagram every single time you deal with a conditional question. It's a lot easier, a lot more quick than it sounds. So you can choose when you create this new diagram next to your question how much of the master diagram to recreate. I don't recreate a lot of it. I just actually use the kind of core structure of the diagram. I recreate that next to my conditional. I draw my condition on that diagram, and then I work from there. I refer back to my master diagram to see the rest of the rules. But you can recreate the whole thing if you want. But here I would just recreate 1 through 7. I'd write 7 dashes. I might put the numbers under them just to keep track. But then I'd refer back for the other rules, and I'd of course draw my condition into my new little workspace for this question. So go ahead and use a pen and paper, pause your video, and write a new diagram. Put the condition into it, and see if you can answer this question. And I'll be back in just a moment to walk you through it. Alright, let's take a look at the condition. If Daryl starts in the position immediately before Barbara's, which one of the following could be true? Okay, so that's if D is immediately before B. Okay, so D and B are already involved in rules. D is here and B is here. Okay, and I think I can make some interesting combinations now with this new condition. I know that D has to be immediately before B based on my condition. I already know from the other rules that B is immediately before E, so I can add that on to my picture here. And I already know from the other rules that F and D have to be together, right next to one another, either way. But in this case, one side of D is already taken, so it's got to be in front of it. Okay. So now I have this big old chunk here of 4 elements. Yet remember, I also know that C had to be before B and E. And since D and F are immediately before B and E, C comes before that whole chunk. So because of this condition, I actually have pretty interesting information about 5 of the 7 elements. That should do a lot of limiting on my diagram. Now, what's the question ask? Which one of the following could be true? Okay, so I'm going to quickly move through these answer choices and look for either a pass, right, an okay, or some kind of problem that arises immediately that shows me it can't be true. I'm going to imagine these scenarios given my new condition and see what happens. A, Barbara starts in the 4th position. Okay, Barbara in the 4th position, that would put E in the 5th position, B, E, and there need to be 3 things before Barbara, D, F, C. Yeah, but then there's no room for G, right? If B is in 4, we need to put D, F, and C before it. That takes 1, 2, and 3, and there's no room for G, so can't be A. Constanza starts in the 4th position. Okay, Constanza in the 4th. Well, we know there need to be 4 things after Constanza. C, F, D, B, E. But if C is in 4, there are only 3 slots remaining. We need 4 things to fit in 3 slots. Not possible. B is wrong. It can't be true. Daryl starts in the 3rd position. Daryl in 3rd. This is the same problem we had with A. If Daryl's in 3rd, 2 things need to go before it. F and C. There's no room for G. Faye starts in the 2nd position. Faye in the 2nd, well, that's the same problem again. Faye in the 2nd means C in the 1st, which by the way is already a problem right here. And D right afterward, no room for G. Betrayal of this. That's wrong, so it must be, I hope. Gertrude starts in the 3rd position. Gertrude in 3. Okay, we remember we have a chunk of 4, F, D, B, E. C could come before it here, and A could be here. Yep, that would work. I'll just prove it to you. I wouldn't actually do this on the exam. Take up too much time to plot it out, but just to show you what I'm seeing in my head, I need to put my chunk. Turns means A is here, C is here. Remember, C doesn't have to be in the chunk, it just has to be before it. So there can be a break. C, G, the chunk. And yeah, that's fine. That's your answer. And one more using this diagram. Another conditional. So you want to, remember, make a new workspace, a new diagram for this question. Recreate at least part of the diagram and put your condition into it and try to make new inferences. I will say up front before you pause your video, this is the hardest thing we've done so far this lesson. This particular question is the hardest question we've dealt with so far in this lesson. Do not be disheartened if you can't get this one, especially if you're just learning how to do logic games. I just included it here because I want there to be a range of difficulty. I want there to be opportunities for you to challenge yourself. And I believe you can do this one. It might take more time. It may take some false starts and some trying things out. But allow yourself that space to try it. Just don't be worried if it's tough for you for now. This is a difficult one. So pause your video and give this a try. Give it your best try, and then I'll be back to talk you through it. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do with this question is I'm going to pretend that this is my workspace. This is a new diagram I created just for this question, and I'm going to put in the condition. I need all the help I can get. So I put the G there. And now I want to think about what that condition has done for me. What new limitations has it created? And I start to think about the other major limiting pieces of my diagram. What are the other rules that are most limiting, that most constrain my ability to move around? Sometimes there'll be a element in the roster that can go pretty much anywhere. That's not the element you want to be focused on when you're thinking about the questions. You want to be thinking about the rules that constrain possibilities. So often I'm thinking about chunks, and I'm thinking about chunk combinations like this, or I'm thinking about only 2 possibilities or only 3 possibilities. I'm thinking about the pieces of my diagram that really limit what I can do. So with this one, what I'm thinking about is, okay, if G is here, I know that my major limiting pieces that are remaining are these chunks. These are big things that have to fit in, and there are only so many ways you can fit in chunks. So I know already, since C can't be in the first slot, that C has to be somewhere after G, and of course everything that's after C will also be after G. So I know that following G will be C, B, and E, and D and F, no matter what order they're in, are a chunk. The 2 of them have to be together, so they also can't be in the first slot. So I know that they have to fit somewhere in here also. I'm not exactly sure where, but I know that this chunk and C all have to be here, because that's the effect of putting G in 2. G in 2, C can't be in 1, so it's got to be after. Everything after C has to also be in here somewhere, and this chunk has to be in here somewhere. Now that's 5 pieces that need to fit after G. And how many slots are after G? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are the same number of slots as things I already know need to be there. What does that mean? It means that I can't have A here. This would be a 6th element, and I only have 5 slots. Since A can't go here, it's got to go in 1, and that is the must be true. If Gertrude starts in the 2nd position, all these things have to come after her, which means A has to come before her. So your answer here is B. Again, that one's tough. That one takes a more developed intuition about logic games, but if you got it, round of applause for you. But if you missed it or you really struggled with it, take this as an example of where you're going to get someday. right? You're going to develop that same intuition that I just demonstrated that allowed me to see how certain rules can come together and what the effect of this conditional was. And now some homework for basic sequencing games. The diagram that we've been dealing with for much of this lesson, that runner's diagram with the 7 positions side by side, that is a very typical basic sequencing game diagram. So all of the games that you see in this homework set will also have similar diagrams. So you should know how to create that diagram. And if not, go back in the video and review how we created the diagram early on. The rules that you see in these games will be very similar to the rules we practiced representing symbolically and the rules that were involved in the runner's game. So you should be able to deal with these homework questions at this point. Now, I'm presenting in this section homework sets that are based on game type. And this is very similar to what we did in the logical reasoning lesson, where homework was presented for each question type. And the reason is that I recommend, especially in the beginning, practicing drilling game types the same way you would practice drilling question types. It's good to do a number of basic sequencing games in a row, over and over and over, as opposed to just doing one type of game here, one type of game there, and just kind of hoping that you progress. You drill one type of game, and we're going to talk about variations to basic sequencing in the rest of this lesson, and we're going to talk about sorting and variations on sorting in the next lesson. But for now, it's good to do one basic sequencing after another basic sequencing after another basic sequencing over and over and over, so that you really become comfortable with each of the game types, and you see the subtle ways that they can differ, but they're really sort of the same thing. And that's how you'll get really comfortable creating and using basic sequencing diagrams and combining the rules that are typical of that game type and using your diagrams to answer questions successfully. So here's your homework. They're all basic sequencing games. And just a refresher for how to read this, this is Prep Test 30. Remember, all prep tests are numbered officially by the Law School Admissions Council. This means Section 1 of that prep test, and this means Game 4 within that section. So that will be your basic sequencing game. Prep Test 30, Section 1, Game 4. And again, as was mentioned in earlier lessons, this page number, for quick reference, refers to a book that is put out by the Law School Admissions Council, the book that I'm using for this course, and it's called The Next 10 Actual Official LSAT Prep Tests. It's part of the Law School Admission Council's LSAT series. It's got an orange and purple cover, and again, the next 10 actual official LSAT prep tests. So if you have that book, you can just flip to this page and there will be the game ready for you to complete. Good luck with this homework for basic sequencing games. So that's it for basic sequencing games, but there are variations on that model that you need to be aware of. They don't qualify as separate game types, I'd say, because at their core they are about sequencing elements, but they're different enough that they deserve some attention of their own, and they deserve to have their diagrams modeled for you. So you can have some examples of diagrams for these variations you're going to see. And just a word of advice about thinking about the analytical reasoning section. It's somewhat helpful to categorize games, to look at them and think, okay, this is a basic sequencing, or this is a basic sorting, or this is a sequencing with extra dimensions, as you'll see in a second, or whatever. But I really want you to not get locked into that way of thinking. It's helpful at first, and it's helpful in a lot of cases, but the best performers on the logic game section are going to be those who have a deeper understanding of logic games, how they work, and they're ready for games that are odd, that don't quite fit into the categorizations that they have in their heads. They understand how logic games work, and so they can read through a setup and know how to make a diagram based on what that information is in that setup. So in one breath, I want to say, keep these variations as like somewhat kind of types. Keep them in mind like that and look out for them because there are patterns and you do see similar kinds of games very often. But at the same time, don't get so locked into these variations as types that you get blindsided if the LSAT throws you something that looks a little bit different. Think of these as different features that can be had in a sequencing model, and you can add more than one of these features, or you can have just one of them. Usually it's just one, but again, I want to stress that you should be preparing with some flexibility. That should be your aim. That being said, this part of the lesson will be very helpful. There are patterns and you see them a lot, so let's get to it, talking about variations on the sequencing model. Our first variation on the sequencing model is going to be the addition of extra dimensions. Now don't worry, this is not the science fiction portion of the course. By extra dimensions, all I mean is that we add another layer of positions to our diagram. So before we had a basic sequencing game that involved runners, and we had 7 positions and we had 7 variables, letters, right, elements, 7 elements to put in the 7 positions. So you put G in position 5, for instance. What an extra dimension game asks you to do is not only put one element in that position, but to put a second element in that position as well, an element of a different type. So where we had runners going in positions before, maybe we'd have something more like 7 runners are to start on a running track from left to right, 1 to 7, and each runner is either right-handed or left-handed. And then you would need to put not only the runner's letter, the name, which runner is in that part, but whether or not that runner is left-handed or right-handed. It'd be another layer of elements to put in the game. So this will become a lot clearer when I show you how to do it in just a moment. But generally what I want you to do with these variations here as we go through them is I really suggest to you that you try these before I show you how to do them. And it's going to be tough. You don't know how to do these yet. But a lot of times, giving ourselves this challenge, throwing ourselves into something that we don't know how to do, and just doing the mental work of trying to figure it out, can really deepen our understanding of the activity that we're doing. As we fail at an activity, we can actually get a lot better at it because we've explored various ways of doing it and we've seen that they didn't work and we've seen why they didn't work. So again, you don't have to, but I strongly suggest that you, before I show you each variation and how to diagram it, because I know some good diagrams for it, but before I show you these good diagrams, give it a try yourself. These are all similar to basic sequencing games, they just have a twist or something different about it, and you want to represent that appropriately. So again, if you want the challenge, pause the video and try to diagram this on your own first. It's like a basic sequencing game, but there's an extra layer, an extra dimension. But either way, I'll be back in just a moment to walk you through setting this one up. Alright, on a road trip, a group of friends visits 6 cities: Bedford, Carlsberg, Dover, Edmonton, Phoebes, and Glendale. Okay, so far this looks like just a regular sequencing game. 6 positions, 6 elements: B, C, D, E, F, G. They visit each city only once, and each time they either stay in a hotel or in a motel. There's your second dimension. For each element, there's going to be another layer. They'll go to the city, but in that city, we're not sure yet, but they'll either stay in a hotel or a motel. There's a second layer. And the itinerary must conform to the following rules. And then we have our rules here. So the way I'm going to create this diagram is very similar to the way I create basic sequencing diagrams. I'm going to start with 6 positions. There are 6 stops on this trip. And here, just like in a basic sequencing game, we'll have our roster. Here are the 6 cities: B, C, D, E, F, and G. These 6 elements will have to go into these 6 positions here. They're going to visit 6 cities. There's going to be some order to the visits. So these elements should go into these positions. Now I'm going to add my second layer. just like this. It's another layer. 6 positions. They're the same. They're going to correspond, but there's a second layer. And this second layer is going to be either H for hotel or M for motel. So in the 6 positions up here, I'm going to put B, C, D, E, F, and G in some order. And below, I'm going to mark whether or not they're in a hotel or a motel for each particular city. And that's it. And then we can number it just like we number a regular sequencing game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's pretty much it. Not so hard, right? Let's get to the rules and try to represent them symbolically. The group must stay in a hotel only twice. Okay, interesting. So the way I'm going to represent that is by filling out my roster a little bit. We know there are 6 positions. We know that one of the layers is either H or M, but now we know more about this. Now we know the numbers. We know there's only 2 H's. So I'm just going to write out all my elements here. 2 H's and 4 M's for a total of 6. 2 hotels, 4 motels. And here we go. B, C, D, E, F, G for the top row, and H, H, M, 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 M for the bottom row in some order. All right. Thebes must be visited directly after Dover. Well, there's nothing special about this. This is just a chunk. Just like a basic sequencing game. The group stays in a hotel in Edmonton. Okay. How do you think we're going to do this one? Not too tough. It's really not too tough. It's just another chunk. So we've got Edmonton on top this time, and below it we know there's going to be a hotel, and they're a chunk. This E and this H must go together. The group must stay in a motel in the first city they visit. Okay, so we'll put an M right in there on the appropriate layer. The group visits Bedford last and stays in a motel. Cool. Okay, we learn a lot here. Bedford is on the top layer, and it's a motel on the next layer. And the group cannot stay in hotels in 2 consecutive cities. Okay, so no hotel chunk. That's what we know from there. Now we know a couple other things right off the bat. I'm not going to mark them here, but they're good to keep in mind. For instance, obviously we know Edmonton's not first, because Edmonton has to have a hotel, and a motel is first. We know that Edmonton is not next to another hotel, because it's got to be a hotel, and no hotels are next to each other. So you should start to look at how the rules tell you a little bit more than what they first seem to. But here it is. Here's the setup. I don't think it's too crazy, but you see what an extra dimension is. It's a second layer. But basically, this is just a sequencing one. There's just 2 layers to keep track of. Once you've got the diagram figured out, you just answer the questions like you would with any other game, or like the basic sequencing games. So, we've got your diagram. Go ahead and pause your video and try this one on your own, and then I'll be back in a second to help you out with it. Alright, this is a conditional question. Remember what that means? It means we have to, if we were on a practice test or on the real test, we wouldn't mess with our master diagram. We would create a new diagram by the question, a workspace diagram, and we'd put the condition right into that diagram and then see what happens. But for now, we're going to pretend that this is our workspace diagram. So let's put the condition in it. And the condition is if the group stays in a motel at the second city they visit. The question is which one of the following must be false. So if the group stays in a motel at the second city they visit, let's put that in. M goes in 2. And now pause for a second. Don't just jump right to the question. Once we put a condition, often that leads to inferences. That leads to more information. And whatever that more information is usually what the LSAT wants you to get so that you can easily answer the question. So don't be too hasty. We put a new condition here. Can we put anything else? Do we learn anything else because of this? Can any inferences be made? Look at the other rules. Look at our new game board. How about this rule here? There can be no consecutive hotels. And there are only 3 positions left in this layer where hotels have to go. That means there's only one way for this to happen. The hotels have to be separated, and that can only be if there's a hotel in 3 and a hotel in 5, which means there's a motel in 4. And this entire layer is complete. Because of this condition, the entire layer is complete. So that's the inference this question wants you to see. And now you should be thinking, once you've reaped some benefits from learning stuff, getting some inferences on a conditional question, you should be thinking that the question is going to test that, and the answer should be related to that. So you want to be strategic about the way you look at these answer choices. You want to look for one that will be affected by what you just did. So I'm not going to go through each one. I'm going to take a look and see and think about this critically. Well, now I know where every motel and hotel is. And I do have another rule that deals with hotels. I wonder if there's an answer choice that talks about Edmonton. I look down, here's Edmonton. Edmonton is visited 4th. Edmonton, 4th? Nope, there's a motel there. See, this rule combined with what we learned here, I had a feeling that it would be involving Edmonton. And it is exactly the right answer. Edmonton is 4th. Cannot be true. It must be false. And you can check the other ones. They'll all be okay. They could be true. But this one can't be. And going to this one quickly is a direct result of seeing which one of our other rules is really affected by the condition here. Another question, another conditional. Try it out yourself, and I will be right back with the solution. Okay, let's take a look. If Edmonton is visited 4th and the group stays in a motel in Phoebes, which of the following must be true? Okay, let's start with our conditions. Edmonton's 4th, and we know Edmonton's a hotel, so we can fill in our second layer for the 4th position. And, okay, I'm already seeing inferences from just putting this. Remember this consecutive hotel rule? I already know an H can't be here and an H can't be here. That means an H has got to be here. And that takes care of, we only have 2 hotels, so the rest must be motels. Okay, and what's that second condition? The group stays in a motel in Phoebes. Okay, let's put that in. We have a rule with Phoebes. We can extend this chunk because we learned more about it. Not only is Phoebes to the right of D, but M has to come below it. That's got to be a motel. Alright. Anything else we can learn? This was a pretty powerful condition. Yeah, there is. Do you see it? We've got to fit this little chunk here, this odd-shaped backward flag going to the left. We have to fit this chunk somewhere here. And it's going to have to be in a place where there's a motel. So from some motel, we're going to have to be able to go up and left. But how can that happen here? Can it happen here? Nope. Because we go M, F, this should be a D, but there's already an E there. How about here? M, F, no space for the D. So it's got to be here. This is the only place that chunk can fit. So now we know a little bit more. We know Phoebes is in 3. We know D is in 2. And the only things left are C and G, so we can represent that. Oh yeah, this is a very powerful condition. Whichever one, if C's in one, G will be in the other. If G's in this one, C will be in the other. So this is a very powerful diagram. We should be able to just easily pick out which one of the following must be true. Carlsberg is visited first. Nope, it could be either one. Glendale is visited fifth. Nope, it can be either one. The group stays in a motel in Glendale. Aha! No matter which position Glendale gets, 1 or 5, it's going to be over an M. See the only two options left for G? They're over M's. This is your answer. Now again, in keeping with the kind of process that I've been talking about so far, I'd move on at this point. I'm very confident in this. But just to show you, just for the sake of instruction, the group stays in a hotel in Glendale. Well, we know that can't happen. Both the Glendales are motels. And Phoebes is visited second. That can't happen. Phoebes is already dealt with. It's in 3. So, hope you did well on this one. Extra dimensions aren't so bad, right? Well, I hope you don't think they're so bad because there are a good number of them for homework. So, here's your homework for sequencing with extra dimensions. Now let's talk about relative sequencing games. Relative sequencing games are defined by their rules. The setup is going to look just like a basic sequencing game, but you're going to know it's a relative sequencing game when every rule involves some relation between at least 2 elements. Nowhere in this list of rules does it say something like Vega is in position 4. Every rule is relative. It talks about a relationship between 2 or more elements. So again, before I show you how to diagram this one, I want you to challenge yourself and try it on your own. So pause your video now, challenge yourself to do this, try to figure out how you would make a diagram for this kind of game, and then I'll be back to show you how to do it. Okay, I bet you didn't guess this, but I'm actually not going to start by putting 8 positions out here. On relative sequencing games, I actually don't put any positions, I just diagram the rules. And the reason I do that is because the rules pretty much always end up connecting in some very interesting ways, and we end up with this stretchy diagram that involves all the elements and the relations between the elements, and that's usually enough to answer the questions. Sometimes you need to draw a workspace diagram by a question that involves the positions, but in the beginning I just diagram the rules. So let's take a look. 8 professors: Mezzo, Wynne, O'Quinn, Ponzi, Rembrandt, Slater, Tallis, and Vega give consecutive presentations at a conference. No professor presents more than once, and no 2 professors present simultaneously. The following conditions apply. Okay, let's take the rules one at a time. Mezzo must present at some point before Tallis. Okay, no problem. Mezzo before Tallis. Wynne must present at some point after Slater and at some point before Rembrandt. Okay, so that means Slater, then N, then R. Tallis must present at some point before both Vega and Wynne. Okay. Oh, I already see I can attach that to this one, so I'm just gonna do that. Okay. O'Quinn must present at some point after Rembrandt. I can attach that to this. Now, a lot of the elements were dealt with here. One of them was not, Ponzi. So actually, I represent Ponzi kind of in his own little roster here. I give him a cloud because Ponzi's a floater. It just doesn't matter where Ponzi goes. And he or she has no relation to any of the other elements. It's just a floater. But these 2 little trees here can actually be combined. Why? There's a common element, N. So I can rewrite this whole thing like this. First part will look just like that bottom diagram. and then I'll attach the top diagram through the common element. And there we have our relative sequencing diagram. Now it's important that you understand how this thing works. These lines here can stretch. So V can be right after T and before N, or it can stretch past N, or it can stretch past R, or it can stretch past O, but it can't go up and over the T. Same with N. It can stretch past V, but N can't get in front of R. N can't get in front of O. These relations are important, but the ones that are not connected to each other, like V and R, as long as they're not connected through another element, like V and M are, then they can stretch around. V can go behind R or in front of R. It can stretch forward and backward, but it can't change its position relative to certain elements. So V can't up and over and get in front of M. M can't get around T. We have to respect these, but after that we can stretch. I'll show you how that looks in a second. Here's our first question for the relative sequencing game. It asks you which of the following must be true. And as long as you understand how this diagram works, this shouldn't be too tough. So pause the video, try it yourself, and then I'll be back to talk you through it. Okay, here we go. This should demonstrate what I mean by the stretching. Which one of the following must be true? Slater presents at some point before Tallis. What do you think of that? Can I stretch Slater? I can, right? Slater and Tallis are not in a chain that doesn't switch directions. So S, N, R, and O are in a chain of one direction. S has to be in front of N, has to be in front of R, has to be in front of O. That's not the same relationship that S has to T. So because of that, S can stretch. It can be behind T or it can be in front of T. It can go either way. So this one is not a must be true, it's a could be true. Next one. Mezzo presents first. Well, no. Just like the S can stretch before the T, it can keep stretching before the M. S doesn't have a relationship with M that stops it from being pulled in front of it. Additionally, who else could be first? Remember the floater? Floater can go anywhere. It's not related to this. So no matter how you worked this out, P could always be first. So this definitely is not must be true. O'Quinn presents last. Because of the floater, we already know that one's wrong. But who else could be last? Who else could stretch past O? R can't. That would involve switching this direction here. N can't. S can't. T can't. M can't. V. V could stretch all the way over, past the floater, past the O. It could become the last one. So V or P could be last also. Rembrandt performs at some point after Tallis. Okay, now T and R are in this sort of rigid relationship. R has to be after N, and N has to be after T, therefore R has to be after T. And that is what this says. This is your right answer. We can't stretch R around to get it to not be after T. That's not the kind of relationship it has to T. And just for fun, let's look at E. Again, I would move on at this point, but E, Ponzi performs at some point before Rembrandt. Well, there can be no must be true really with a floater because it can be anywhere. It can be in front of Rembrandt, after Rembrandt, it doesn't matter. So that's wrong. This question was really testing your ability to combine the rules into this one larger diagram. Once we did that, it's pretty clear that R is in a relationship with T that makes this the right answer. So that was what was being tested here. Another relative sequencing question. Try it on your own, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, this one's a conditional, so I'm actually going to make myself a workspace diagram. If Mezzo presents third and Vega presents last, then exactly how many different orders are there in which the professors can present? Okay, now that we have some conditions that are not just relative, I'm going to use that number line. Remember, it's 8. There are 8 positions, 8 elements. Okay, and I'm not going to put the numbers, I'm just going to eye it. Mezzo is third. Vega is last. Now that they've locked in a couple of these, I can look at the rest of them and see if there are any inferences I can make. Okay, here's M. I know that all of these have to be behind it. Okay, and V is already locked back there at the end. So I know that M, T, and R, O all have to be behind it. How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only one way this can happen. Okay, that locks in a lot of elements. And then what could these be? Well, S is remaining and P is remaining, and the S can stretch before M, and the P can go anywhere. So it looks like I can't say anything about what has to be here. I just have to leave it like this. P is going to be in one of those positions, and S is going to be in the other. But still, that leaves us with only 2 ways this could play out. Either PS and then this, or SP and then this. So our answer is 2. Okay, I hope this was clear to you. Relative sequencing games are actually kind of fun, stretching that diagram around. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy, and they can be a little bit of fun. And here's your homework for relative sequencing. Now, I was a little disappointed when I went through the tests that are reserved for homework in this course and found only one relative sequencing game. I don't think that's really representative. I think they're a little more frequent than that, to be honest. So do this one on Prep Test 38, but keep an eye out and look through some of the other practice tests that you have available to you, and take a look and try to find the other relative sequencing game. Make sure to drill these. Again, they're pretty easy once you get the hang of them. So these should be games you should be able to do very quickly when they come up, but you should practice. You need to get an intuition for that stretching. It can be a little confusing at first, but it's actually pretty intuitive and it works really well. So try to find the other ones. Remember, the marker of a relative sequencing game is that each and every rule is going to relate one element to another in some before, after, or left, right way, and it's not going to make any hard assignments like C must be in 2. It's going to be all relational rules. So keep an eye out for those and practice them. And here's our final variation and the last part of our lesson: mismatched sequencing games. What mismatched sequencing games are games in which the amount of elements that you have is different than the amount of positions that you have. There are a few different ways that can happen, and I'll talk about that in a second after we deal with this game. But it's when there's a different number of elements and positions. Usually it's in our runners, for instance, it was 7 positions, 7 elements, but here there'll be a mismatch. So again, challenge yourself. Try this on your own first. How would you do it? Be creative. Really dig into this and spend some time on it, thinking about it. And after you do that, I'll be back in just a moment to show you a nice way of diagramming this game. Okay, here we go. A company executive will interview 5 of 7 job candidates. See, already we see there's going to be some kind of mismatch. Artie, Boris, Carla, Danny, Emma, Frederick, and Gil. Consecutively and one at a time. There's your directional component. The following conditions apply. So look what's going on here. There are 7 elements, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but only 5 of them are going to be interviewed. So how can we represent that? Take a look. I'm going to put 7 slots here. But now I'm going to only number the ones that are going to actually be interviewed. That's the direction, the order that we care about. In which order are the 5 who actually get interviewed going to be interviewed? Then I'm going to partition this part off. And I'm going to call this the out section. Just because 2 of the 7 elements are not going to be assigned an interview doesn't mean we can't assign them somewhere. If they're not being interviewed, we'll just call that an assignment to out. So we're still going to assign 7 elements. It's just only 5 of them are going to be here and 2 of them are going to be here. We'll put up our roster. Okay. Frederick and Gil. And we'll take a look at our rules. Artie must be one of the last 3 to be interviewed if he is interviewed at all. Okay. We've seen something sort of like this before. Let's put Artie here. But again, I can't just leave it like this because we don't know if Artie's even going to make it. So I don't have a really creative way of doing this. Just put an or here. He's either in one of those last 3 spots or he's out. If Carla is interviewed, Emma cannot be. Okay, let's represent that down here. If C is on this side of things, E is on this side of things. And now, don't forget your logic lessons. They come up all over the place. What more can we learn here? Never write a conditional without thinking about the contrapositive as well. If E is not here, we're going to do the contrapositive now. If E is not here, which is the same as saying E is over here, there's only 2 options, then C must not be. Why? Because if E were here and then C were here, that would trigger this, and E would have to be over here. We can't have that. So if C is here, E is here, and if E is here, C is here. Either Frederick or Gil is interviewed, but not both. How about this? On this side of things will be either Frederick or Gil. And whichever one it is, we'll have the opposite over here. Boris must be interviewed. Okay. He's on this side of things. If Artie is interviewed, Carla must be interviewed after him. Okay, I'll put that over here near the Carla rule that we already have, just so we can keep them in mind. So let's put if A, meaning if A is on this side of things, then A before C. Okay, not that pretty, but this is a diagram for the mismatched sequencing game. Okay, here's our first question for mismatched sequencing. Try it out on your own, and I'll be back in just a second. Okay. Each of the following could be true except. So we have our except modifier. And the correct answer is going to be a must be false. But we really didn't make many inferences on this diagram. We didn't learn a whole lot. And there's no conditional here. We really don't have a lot of resources to work with. I hate when questions are like this, but it does happen, so we have to be ready for it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through each answer choice, and I'm going to imagine it on this diagram. I'm going to see if it triggers any rules, and I'm going to see if anything pops out as impossible at kind of a first pass. So let's do that. Carla and Frederick are both interviewed. Okay, it doesn't say where, but Carla on this side and Frederick on this side, that activates these. Carla knocks E over, so E would be out. F knocks G over. G would be out E and G. I don't know. It looks okay, I guess. Boris is interviewed last. Well, we know Boris has to be in it, but it doesn't seem to really matter when. It's hard to believe that that must be false. Boris is interviewed third. It's probably the same thing. Boris is a floater. I can't imagine why that would be a problem. Artie's interviewed fourth. Artie here. Okay, Artie is in. That brings in C. So AC, that knocks E over. That looks okay too. Carla is interviewed, but Artie is not. So Carla's somewhere over here. That triggers this, puts E over here. Artie is not, so A is the other one. Okay. All right. But what about G or F? Look at this rule. One of the two has to be out, either F or G, which means one of these slots is already reserved for that. So with this one, Carla is interviewed, but Artie is not. Carla's somewhere over here, and that pushes Emma into the out slot. Meanwhile, one of these has to be in this other slot, but we know from this answer choice that Artie would have to be here. That doesn't leave any room for one of these guys. So this is your answer. This must be false. And now, wait a minute. I think we can learn something here. We already know that one of these is going to be taken up by either G or F, right? We should have put that in the beginning. Didn't see it. And one of these is going to be either E or C. Because see, one of these gets knocked out. That leaves no room for Artie. Artie has to be in. We don't even need this conditional. Artie has to be in. So let's just get rid of this. There's no room in the out spots for Artie. And if Artie has to be in, it brings C in with him. Because what the rule said was, if Artie is interviewed, then C must be interviewed after him. That means C must be interviewed. So C can't be out either. So we actually know a little bit more than we thought we knew. We know who's out already. It's not Artie. It's Emma, because A and C have to be in. Somewhere A and C have to be in. Right? There's no room for Artie, and Artie brings in C. So A and C are both going to be in, and C activates this, pulls E over, E's out, G or F is out. So the two spots for out are reserved by Emma and either G or F. Okay, this is important. This makes this diagram a lot more interesting. And we should actually backtrack now and redo this diagram, I think, with this new information. So I'm gonna redraw the diagram down here. Actually, go ahead and pause your video. Now that you know that the out spots are taken by E and G or F, rewrite this diagram. And if you have to go back in the video and look at the rules again, that's fine too. But I want you to get a chance to get this diagram right. So pause your video, and I'll be back in a second to rewrite this diagram. Alright, here we go. Same basic structure. I'm going to put the 5, separate the outs. I'll write it up here again. But this time I know what the outs are. E and either G or F. Let me be clear about why that is again, just in case it wasn't clear before. We know, because of this rule, that one of these spots is taken up by G or F. And we know, because of these two rules, that the other spot is either E or C. So we might want to put E/C here, but then we realize that Artie has to be in because there's no room for him in the out. And if Artie's in, he brings in C with him. So that takes out that option for us of E or C. It just becomes E. So in the out, we know we have E and we know we have either G or F, but no Artie and no C. right? So that's how we get the outs. Now, what else can we do here? We don't need this rule anymore because we know how this plays out. C's in and E's out. We don't have to worry about that. We don't really need this rule. We already know G or F is out here, and the other one will be in because there's no spots otherwise. B, there's no question of it being out, so we don't have to really represent that rule either. How about this guy here? Well, this is no longer an option. We know that Artie's in. And we know that Artie comes before C. So A comes before C. If that's the case, can Artie be in 3, 4, or 5? Can Artie be in 5? Where's C going to go? Nope. Artie can't be in 5. Artie's either in 3 or 4. We can represent that this way. Artie's either in 3 or 4. And we should still put that Artie comes before C. A before C. That's pretty important. So wherever Artie falls here, C has to be behind it somehow. And that's it. Look how much simpler this diagram is. This is how it should have been in the very beginning, but we missed it. Okay, and now I have a confession to make. I didn't really miss it. I knew this all along, but I wanted to demonstrate something. So sometimes in this section, you'll do your best diagramming up front, but you'll miss something. And sometimes you'll miss something big, and you'll end up with a really bad diagram like this one. And that's kind of inevitable. I mean, even if you're really well practiced, you're just human, so you might miss something. Luckily, however, sometimes a question can give it away. Sometimes you can find inspiration from a question when you're trying to figure it out and you're struggling, and all of a sudden you see something. For instance, I saw that this had to be false. And I'm saying, well, why does it have to be false? And I learned something about that, and all of a sudden all these inferences just started flowing, right? And you should keep an eye out for that. Sometimes the questions can help you out. Sometimes figuring out the answer to a question through brute force kind of can open your eyes to an inference that you missed. And so just be aware that that can happen, and that these answer choices and these questions can sometimes be sources of information or inspiration to figure out something that you didn't see before, and it can really unlock a lot of the game for you. So I know this process of getting to this much nicer diagram could have been confusing. This would be a great time to back the video up a few minutes and see how this happened again. Listen to how I drew the inferences once I realized this was the right answer, and see how I got from this messy diagram to this one. I think it'll be an informative instructional moment for you to revisit, to see how it is that a certain answer choice stumbled upon just kind of in a makeshift method, brought about some inspiration to actually learn something new, quite a bit new, about the diagram. So take a second look at that, make sure you understand how it happened, and be open to that sort of thing when you are preparing and when you are doing practice tests and when you're on the test. It might just help you out sometime. Now, I hope you're not too mad at me for playing that trick on you. I had your best interest in mind. I've always got your best interest in mind. You know that. So here is our new diagram, our new and improved diagram here, our inspired new diagram. And here is a question that you can try it out on. So try this question, and I will be back in just a moment. Okay, brand new diagram and a conditional. I'm feeling a lot better about this one. We have a lot more information. Okay, remember it's a conditional. This would be our workspace diagram, not our master diagram. If Boris is interviewed third, which of the following could be true? Boris third. Okay, so I'll put Boris over this one here, which in our new diagram reveals something. It means A is over here, and it means C is over here. Oh, what a nice diagram this is. Which one of the following could be true? Well, first, let's pause. Anything else? What's left? Well, either G or F, and the floater D. Okay, let's take a look. Which one of the following could be true? Artie's interviewed first. Nope, Artie's interviewed fourth. Carla's interviewed first. Nope, Carla's interviewed fifth. Frederick is interviewed fourth. Nope, that's taken up by Artie. Frederick is interviewed second. Yeah, that could happen. Frederick could be here, which would put G here, which would put D here. That could happen. That's almost certainly the right answer. But let's just double check, just for instructional purposes. E, Danny's interviewed last. Nope, that spot is taken up. D is your answer. And just so that you can see that it could be true, I'll write it in. I would not do this on a test. I wouldn't waste the time. But just so you can see, Frederick is interviewed second. No problem. Frederick's here. That means we know that this is G. And the only one left is D. And there it is. It could happen. That was pretty easy, huh? Good thing we had this sweet diagram. Alright, that'll do it for this particular game. But I mentioned before that there were different ways that mismatched sequencing could occur. The defining characteristic of the variation is that there is a different number of elements than there is positions, but there are a few ways that can happen. So I want to take a moment now to explain those ways and also show you how you could diagram them, just so you're aware of them. So the first way is what we just saw. There are more elements than there are positions, and some of those elements are out. So we just had 5 positions, but 7 elements. So we made a new spot that had some out positions. And then we finally had a match between the amount of elements in the out of positions, just we knew that some of them weren't numbered, some of them were out. The next way it could happen is if there are too many positions. There are extra positions, there are more positions than there are elements. And this variation of this is going to have only some of those positions filled. So let's say we have 5 positions, but only A, B, C, and D, only 4 elements. We have an extra position, right? I'll even number them just to be clearer. What are we going to do? This might be a game where they tell us there are 5 slots for something. Here are 4 elements to put in it. One of the slots is not going to be used. How can we represent that? Let's just make up an element. An element that means not used. Now we fixed the mismatch, right? A, B, C, D, and X, where X means this isn't used. So we can learn about the not used element, so to speak, the same way we can learn about a used element. If there's something in the question that says if 3 is not used, well, we're just going to use it. We're just going to put a not used symbol in it. Okay? So that's how you do extra positions where only some of those positions are filled. Just add the number of elements that you need and make them X's. Okay, another way it could happen is there are extra positions, more positions than elements, and all of those positions are filled. So let's say we have, again, 5. But we only have 4 elements. A, B, C, and D. Well, if all these positions have to be filled, and there are only 4 elements, what do we know is going to happen? How are we going to fill that fifth element? Oh, we're going to have to double up. One of these elements is going to have to be used again. So you can represent that if you want somehow. You can put like a square here or something, um, or a question mark, whatever. It doesn't matter. Or nothing, right? I think I'd put nothing. I would just put my four elements and be aware that one of them has to be doubled. This might end up being A, B, D, C, and then double up D. That's how it might turn out. So you only have the four elements, but you have five positions, you just double one. That's another way mismatched sequencing could happen, and it's not too tricky. None of this is too tricky, I think. These are just variations on the sequencing game, and like I said before, don't get so hung up on, oh my god, is this an extra element sum out mismatched sequencing game? Just be aware that there are ways that these games can be modified, and there are little twists that can be put on these games. And you need to be nimble, you need to be flexible, you need to be thinking sensibly. Okay, so extra positions, only some of them are filled. Well, alright, I can easily modify my diagram, adding an X to my roster. That's a move that you should hopefully be able to make once you're really well practiced, just on the fly. If you're throwing something you haven't seen before, just take it in stride and stop and think about it for a second. If it's unusual, think about it for a second. It's probably not going to be terribly hard because the LSAT's not trying to make you fail. It's just if it's a new thing, it's probably an easier thing. That's usually how it works. If it's brand new, you haven't seen it before, it's probably going to be a little easier. So don't be alarmed. Just be flexible, and understand that these games can be tweaked in minor ways, and be ready to adjust your diagramming and your strategies for those minor ways. But on the whole, they're either going to be sequencing or sorting, and then there's going to be some little variations, and some of those variations have even smaller variations. So the logic games section is dynamic in that way, but the core skills are diagramming in a sensible way, making inferences, and using your diagram to answer the questions. It's really something that you can master and get a lot better at. And here's your homework for mismatched sequencing. And that's it for this lesson. Congratulations on getting through the first half of analytical reasoning. This was a long lesson, wasn't it? And we've got another one on this section. But I think that's good. I think that the most important part of your preparation is logic games, because it is really, in my experience, and both my own experience and my experience of seeing other people, I really find that the logic games are the most unfamiliar. They're the kind of thing that you can't really just jump onto the test and sort of figure out how to do there. You need to understand how this section works. You need to know that you have to diagram. A lot of people don't even know you have to diagram. So there's a lot to learn in logic games, and because there's a lot to learn, there's a lot of progress to be made. Very often a student will take a diagnostic test, do okay on the logical reasoning, do okay on reading comprehension, and just bomb logic games. And very quickly we can address that. We can get you to be very good at logic games just by teaching you how to play this game. Once that happens, immediate score increases. And that is what we're trying to do. So I hope this lesson was helpful for you. I hope this has given you a good introduction to logic games, and that you have a good sense of how sequencing games work, the variations to sequencing games, and you are on the road to mastering this section. I promise you, you can make huge progress here, and I really believe it's true. You can have a lot of fun here. The logic games can be fun. Keep preparing, keep getting better until you see that. Because if you're not having fun yet, it means you haven't reached your potential in logic games. So I'll see you again for lesson 5 when we'll do some more logic games. That's going to be analytical reasoning, sorting games. I will see you there.